Welcome to Who We Become Life Beyond Change. I'm your host, Amanda Lentz. This is a space for honest conversations about identity, resilience, and what it really means to rebuild after life changes. Here, we share stories of loss and hope, of challenge and courage, and of becoming someone new, even when life doesn't go as planned and the future feels uncertain. Whether you're navigating illness, grief, transition, or simply searching for meaning after change, you are not alone here. And I'm so glad you're here. Let's begin. Welcome back to Who We Become Life Beyond Change. When a cancer diagnosis arrives, it doesn't just change your health, it changes your work, your insurance, your income, your sense of stability. And in the middle of the most frightening experience of your life, you may suddenly find yourself navigating employment law, disability protections, and health coverage without a map, without a guide, and often without even knowing what rights you have. My guest today has spent her career changing that. Monica Bryant is a cancer rights attorney, the co-founder and COO of Triage Cancer, and one of the country's leading voices on the legal and financial realities that follow a cancer diagnosis. Triage Cancer exists because Monica saw a gap between the protections that exist on paper and the people who need them most, and she decided to close it. But this conversation isn't just about the law. It's about what Monica saw, what it called out of her, and who she became while answering that call. Monica, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me and for that lovely introduction.
Of course. So I'd love to start at the beginning of your journey. So before Triage Cancer, before the attorney work in this space, what were you doing, and what did you see that really inspired you to start on this journey?
When I went to law school in DC, I knew I never wanted to see the inside of a courtroom. I was not interested in reviewing contracts. I didn't like the sometimes adversarial nature of a lot of legal work. I went to law school to try to find a path to help people. And initially, I uh, sought that through working in Congress. So while I was in law school, I was fortunate enough to land an internship, and I was a law clerk for Senator Dianne Feinstein. I did that work for over 2 years while I was in law school, and then when I graduated, I got a job on the House side with the Congresswoman, and it was such interesting work getting to be in the room where the conversations are happening, really discussing policy and how we can try to make Americans' lives better through legislation and programs. Absolutely loved my time there, but what I noticed was that many times the people driving those conversations were not the people who were going to be impacted by the outcome of
Hmm,
the legislation. And it made me realize that so many Americans didn't understand the power that they have to affect change. Uh, Life happened, and I ended up leaving Washington, D.C., and I was now in a position where I could really take some time to figure out what's next and how can I use my legal knowledge and now my knowledge of the legislative process and the inner workings of how laws and programs are created in this country to help more people. While I was trying to figure that out, my sister, Joanna Duran, was doing work in the cancer community and needed some help. And so she sort of brought me into that work. A few years later, she and I were talking, and we were sort of lamenting about the idea that there are all of these laws and programs that exist in the United States. But if people don't know about them
hmm,
or they don't know how to use them, like the practical piece of how to access a program or assert their rights, what's the point?
absolutely.
And we landed on the idea that where we could affect change was by helping people understand both the law and the practical components of it in the cancer community. And thus, Triage Cancer was born.
What an incredible journey. And that's just to go back to something you said earlier is, the people that are making decisions are often not the ones impacted. And that's a theme that has come up, especially through this season. And so what a powerful way to use your knowledge and your experience to really make an impact for those who, most people don't have the law degree or the time or, the understanding of the legal practice. And so I love that you and your sister worked together to found this. And so you've started Triage Cancer. And so, working in this space, I'd love to start with what do you think people most urgently need to know? So when someone is newly diagnosed, what are the employment rights that they may have that they may not be aware of?
I think in the employment context, the number one thing that I would want people to know as soon as possible is disclosure is a choice.
Hmm.
And it's a personal choice. And there are many reasons why someone may or may not want to disclose, particularly in the workplace. But what we tend to see is there's almost a panic moment of I'm going to need things from my workplace. And in order to access those things, I'm going to have to share what's going on. And that's not always true. And so and the reason I say that first is that once the cat's out of the bag, you can't take that back.
Sure.
So making sure that people understand that they do have a choice and then thinking through what are their personal preferences and then assuming that they want to maintain that privacy at the workplace. What are the practical components of what do you have to share? And the reason that I talk about this is there are sometimes some assumptions in the workplace when someone's diagnosed. Sometimes it's people's own assumptions. Now I have cancer, I'm going to be going through treatment. I can't work and there's nothing that can help me. Sometimes there's employer assumptions. Well, now my employee is dealing with this. They can't work. There's nothing that can help them. And then oftentimes it's the healthcare professionals' assumptions. Telling patients just go out on disability leave.
Hmm.
When in reality, that might not be an option for everybody.
Yep.
Not everybody has access to job protected leave. Not everyone has access to disability insurance. And some people may need to work for that paycheck or that health insurance. And some people may want to work. For a lot of people, work is a place where there's normalcy, there's routine. Maybe it's the place where they're not the person with cancer. They're just themselves. And
Hmm.
that's a nice break from, being the person with cancer all the time. And so it's a very complex and nuanced conversation. But I think starting with the idea of we have to talk to people about what their needs and wants are and make sure that they know that there are some choices to be made.
Absolutely. And everything you said resonated when I was navigating through my own experience 6 years ago. I felt this need to just tell everyone, but I didn't want to because then there was to your point, there's a perception. Um, and with that, and I love having the choice. And what mistakes or missteps do you see that patients may unintentionally make because they don't have this information? And what do they do maybe in those first few weeks as they're navigating through this life-changing diagnosis that may impact them later? Is there a pattern that you see with your clients?
I think in the employment context, one of the missteps is being definitive in coming up with a plan around work. So we see sometimes people will come and say to an employer, I was just diagnosed, my treatment's going to last 6 weeks, and then I'll be back. Well, that may be the case, but it may not be the case. And
Sure.
so if it's not the situation, now you're in a position where 6 weeks later, you have to go back to the employer and say, well, actually, now what I need is so generally I think it's very helpful to frame these conversations in the employment context as like, this is currently my understanding of the plan, but things might change and I will, certainly keep you abreast. I think the other challenge, or I don't want to say mistake, but perhaps misstep is a good word, is sometimes we see people who will sort of try to power through and not ask for things like reasonable accommodations. So reasonable accommodations are what eligible individuals are entitled to under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It doesn't apply to everybody, but if it does apply to the employer, then they have to provide these reasonable accommodations, which is any change in the work environment or in the way that things are customarily done. And so accommodations are one of the most valuable tools for someone who's trying to work through treatment, who's trying to return to work after treatment, or sometimes even to take time off. But sometimes we see people sort of, again, try to get through it without asking for the reasonable accommodation. And then their job performance might start to suffer.
Yep.
And then an employer might make decisions like demotions or firings based on that job performance. Whereas if they ask for the reasonable accommodation, it puts the employer on notice that they are, in fact, a protected individual under the ADA, and it changes the conversation. And so I think that sort of the being definitive about the plan and then not asking for the accommodations early on in the process are two missteps that sometimes people can make.
Absolutely. And mistake, is a very strong word, and not and one that upon reflection is, we're anyone dealing with a diagnosis, it's, we're just trying to figure out how to live life and navigate through. And so how, we spoke earlier around making that choice to share. And so how, if someone's not willing or able to share a full diagnosis, but they do want to ask for reasonable accommodations, is there a way that they can navigate through that while still protecting, maybe a semblance of privacy while asking for some type of reasonable accommodation?
It's very situationally specific, but generally what we see to be true is that the need for the accommodation is usually not the cancer itself. It's usually around the side effects of treatment,
Sure.
the fatigue, the nausea, the chemo brain, whatever it happens to be. And so one thought around this is when discussing reasonable accommodations with an employer, focusing in on the specific need, the side effect, the thing we're trying to address, and not the cancer is a way to ask for the accommodation, have the medical certification forms filled out that don't speak to cancer. And sometimes it is that piece. I've had people say the reason they don't want to disclose is the location of the cancer. Maybe they don't want to be talking about their breasts with their employer or their prostates or whatever it happens to be.
Sure.
And so again, there's lots of reasons why someone may not want to disclose, but thinking about the underlying need for the accommodation or frankly for the medical leave and narrowing in on that in that conversation is one way to get what someone is entitled to under the law, but also maintain their privacy. I will say, though, that it is incredibly important for anyone who's in this position to be having a very frank conversation with their healthcare professionals about what they are or aren't disclosing at work, because most employers are going to ask for that medical certification form to be filled out by a healthcare professional. And if there's never a conversation, a healthcare professional is probably going to write down cancer.
Of course.
And when we train healthcare professionals, we also suggest to them that they should be initiating these conversations before completing these forms. But I do think it's important that it's a two-way street.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really important conversation to have. You have to be upfront with your provider so that way they can help support you within the workplace as well. And so you're going back to kind of the beginning of building triage cancer. You saw the need, you were brought in by your sister. And so what did it actually take? You had a vision, you had a mission statement, but what did it ask of you to take this idea and this need and build something so impactful?
We actually didn't start as a nonprofit. We felt like there were hundreds, if not thousands, of nonprofits in the cancer space. Did we really need to create another one? And we started doing this education in conjunction with elected officials because it was around the time that the Affordable Care Act had been passed. And so elected officials brought us into their communities and we did educational seminars around was in the Affordable Care Act and how it was going to be implemented and how it was going to change things. What we realized after a couple of years was in order to be able to provide this education on a wide scale, it was going to take resources, including money. And in order to be able to provide this education to the communities for free, we had to raise that money. And so that was really what led us down the path of starting a nonprofit was that the funding model just is what was required. Or creating the nonprofit was required to access those funding models. The first several years were challenging in that people didn't really want to hear about the law. Uh, we were certainly brought in to do educational events by partners. And then once people sat through the educational event, there was this aha moment of, oh, this is why I need this information. But it definitely took some time and some building to get the community's buy-in that this was important information and that unfortunately our system is so complicated, whether it's the healthcare system and health insurance space, whether it's the employment space, even navigating, creating estate planning documents and medical decision making documents. Like it's all a lot on top of the diagnosis and learning the medical information. And to your point, trying to just live life. Really, where we were successful was through our partnerships. We are so thankful at this point. We have close to 300 national and local partners in the cancer community. And because we are really the only organization doing this specific thing on a national level, we are so fortunate that we get to partner with everybody. And we sort of have a fundamental belief that we are stronger together and that we shouldn't be duplicating efforts.
I love that. And I love that you started off by educating the within the law, within the those decision makers, because I do think that there is a gap there. And so what an impactful way to start off and then also to scale. And the fact that you are doing something that no one else is doing, that you're able to partner with so many people and bring this knowledge and education. And where, with the work that you do, where do you see real progress happening? And what gives you, hope, or what can you see that things are starting to change?
Well, that feels like a very loaded question in our current environment. However, I will say what makes that's a really good question. The reason I'm struggling is that we are currently in an environment where we are actually going backwards in terms of access and access to care. And I mentioned the Affordable Care Act. While certainly not a perfect piece of legislation, it provided some giant leaps forward for the cancer community in terms of access to care. That is that is being eroded currently. What does give me hope is that given our educational model at Triage Cancer and the almost 15 years of building awareness and credibility in the cancer community, we are positioned to help people understand those upcoming changes and what their possible options might be. We may not have as many good options for people moving forward, but even in those cases, being able to explain the why to someone, why you no longer have access to this particular type of health insurance, well, it's really hard on a personal level to have to tell people information like that. It is also creating informed voters. People need to understand that the decisions that they are making in the ballot box impact their everyday lives, including their access to healthcare. And so I do feel like, while it's hard, everything we've done for the last 15 years has led us to be really well positioned to hopefully make people aware of these upcoming changes and how to navigate them.
Absolutely. And we'll always deal with a healthcare system and, oftentimes an environment where healthcare changes.
Yeah,
But the education piece that you do is so incredibly valuable. And I think education and knowledge is power in the work that you do just to inform um, is will empower our voters and our people in general to make more informed choices about what's happening.
I certainly hope so.
And so to follow up with that, what keeps you grounded in this work? You know, Systemically, healthcare system is a challenge and, progress may be slow, but what keeps you grounded and what keeps you motivated to keep going?
Knowing that we're filling a true need, I cannot tell you the number of times over the last 15 years where I have spoken with someone and been able to give them information, basic information of the law. I mean, it's not basic information, but it's like not super nuanced legal jargon, but just this is what the law says.
Sure.
And it has allowed them to make a choice
Wow.
that has had a huge impact on them. And then I hang up the phone and I have turned to Joanna and said, what would they have done if they didn't find us? And it sounds slightly egotistical, and I don't mean it in that way, but part of what is unique about what we do is that it's not just one area of the law and that we look at situations holistically. So someone might call us because they're trying to figure out their health insurance option. We're also going to talk to them about, okay, well, what are you doing at work for X, Y, and Z? Or have you filled out these documents that you might need, you know, related to medical decision making? And so that's pretty unique in the legal space. So knowing that we are filling a gap and that gap is it's what would people do if they didn't have the information?
That is so powerful. You are truly changing people's lives. You're truly.
I certainly hope so. I don't think someone should need a law degree to be able to navigate healthcare. And unfortunately, we have a really complicated system. In fact, we often say at our team, there should be a class in high school on health insurance and finances,
100%.
right? Because everyone needs to navigate them, but we're never taught about how to navigate them.
Yep.
And health insurance, it's like learning a new language.
Yes.
And typically, people don't learn that language until they're in a moment of crisis where they now need to access healthcare and navigate the system, which just makes it harder.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that. I just I wish I had known, about the work that you do 6 years ago, and I will say I was in a fortunate situation with good health insurance, but I've had so many conversations with both women and men who don't have insurance and really have been, struggling through the whole process. And so what gives you hope, as you think about the future, of cancer survivorship, not just legally, but, as we as a society hold and you really support the people who are living with it or supporting those who are.
I think what gives me hope is that our system is constantly changing. So even though it feels very hard in this exact moment, and looking down at the next 6 to 12 months and the changes that we're going to have to navigate, knowing that that's not etched in stone is what gives me hope.
And so, Monica, for anyone listening, how can people learn more about triage cancer and the work that you do, the education you provide?
So, our website's a great place to start. It's simply triagecancer.org. What you'll find on the website is information delivered in a variety of formats. So, we host educational events, we host webinars, we have a longer conference, we have healthcare professional trainings. All of them are free to attend. You just sign up on our website. We also have written materials that can be read online, downloaded, and printed. Healthcare professionals can order bulk hard copies. In fact, you see them behind me. And then we have other resources. So we have our own podcast, we have animated videos, we have a legal and financial navigation program where people can speak to us one on one. So if they've reviewed our materials and they still have questions about how to navigate something or how something specifically applies to their situation, they can fill out a short form on our website and then pick a time to speak with one of our staff attorneys. So we provide the information in a variety of formats because we know that people learn in different ways. We also know that people come to us with different capacities. So someone who's at the beginning of all of this and is an information overload, maybe a 5-minute animated video is a good place to start. Someone who maybe wants all the details before they make a decision, maybe one of our practical guides or our online cancer finances tool will give you more details. And so we hope that there's something for everybody.
That's amazing. Well, we will link your resource, your podcast, your website, everything in the show notes. And so, as we close, a cancer diagnosis should never have to mean financial devastation. It should never mean losing your job, your insurance, or your sense of professional identity. Not because those things don't happen, but because there are protections that exist and you deserve to know about them. What Monica has built at Triage Cancer is not just a resource, it's a refusal to let the gap between rights on paper and rights in practice continue to swallow people whole. So, if you're navigating a diagnosis right now and you're worried about your job, your insurance, or your financial stability, please visit Triage Cancer. The information is free, it's clear, and it's there for you. So, Monica, thank you for the clarity that you bring to something so complex and for the humanity that you carry in the work that lives at the intersection of law and loss. What you've built matters so much, and who you are becoming through building it matters just as much. And so until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and keep becoming who you're meant to be. Thank you for joining me today on Who We Become. I hope this conversation reminded you that growth isn't always easy, but it is always meaningful. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need it. And if you haven't already, be sure to follow, rate, and review the show. It truly helps these stories reach those who may need a reminder they are not alone. Remember, what happened to you is part of your story, but it is not the end of it. You are not defined by what happened to you. You are shaped by how you rise. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep becoming who you're meant to be.